Hello everyone, back out on the water, my little yellow kayak, and I'm going to get going in just a second here. But I found this pond on Google Maps, and there's a stream that leads to the pond. At least that's what Google Maps says. I stopped here with the crawdad a couple weeks back, and I looked at it and I thought, it's possible. Maybe with a little extra effort, maybe a little cursing, I could get it done. But we've had some rain and the water's up, and I was passing by with the truck and I had the kayak with me, and I thought, you know what? Today's the day. And the first part, it's very doable with the crawdad. There's a few parts up ahead that get a little narrower, and I have to go over some logs. The kayak floats in almost nothing. I just need a couple inches of water. The crawdad doesn't draft too much either, but it's a little wider, and there'd be parts of this where the motor would get gunked up in the weeds. I'd have to paddle. Crawdad doesn't paddle very well. So this is working out pretty well. I can navigate this little stream pretty well in the kayak. Yeah, this part right here. This would be a little tight for the crawdad. I think it's possible, but it'd be a little tight. And then it opens up again. No problem. So I'm not even fishing this part. I'm just paddling up to see if I can get to the pond. Sometimes, even on the map, it looks like it should be feasible. But then you get halfway there and there's a big old log across the stream. Came down in a storm or something and it wasn't on the map. So you never really know until you try it, and you just have to put a boat in and see how far you get, and if you have to turn around, then that's it. But we made it. I can see the pond opening up ahead. We got a partly cloudy day today. It's kind of hazy. I'm looking around at the water as I'm making my way out to the pond, and it's heavily stained. I assume it's tannins from the swampy areas around the pond and the trees, and the tannins in the leaves leach into the water, and it just turns into like a black tea color. Very darkly stained water at this pond. But I made it out here. Got a little bit of a breeze, northeast wind. Wind's kind of variable, but for now we've got the wind, which is good. That tends to make the fish less picky. So like I said, I've never been here before, and I have to start somewhere. And my plan is to start with a Whopper Plopper, because if I can catch them on topwater, I just stick with that. And if I get a few fish on the Whopper Plopper, that'll tell me what kind of fish are in here, what size they are, and then I can go back in areas that I did well with the Whopper Plopper, or even on the whole pond, and pick them apart with a frog or a jig or soft plastic or whatever. So around most of the pond there's kind of this swamp, and then at the water's edge there's lily pads. There's dollar pads and lily pads around most of the pond. So it's basically an oval and then a ring of pads and then swamp marsh. Sort of concentric circles. This pond isn't very deep, maybe 20 feet according to the map. Sometimes those maps can be off, especially in places where they can't get a mapping boat in. So I'm always a little suspect. If you don't know where the ramp is, chances are they didn't get a mapping boat in there. And so that means the map may be complete fiction or not quite accurate. So you just have to kind of take that stuff with a grain of salt until you actually see for yourself. So it doesn't take too long, and I got some fish coming in on the Whopper Plopper. That's a black color. They call it a loon color. But it's mostly black with a little bit of white on the sides. And I thought in that dark stained water, a lot of the fish tend to be darker. And I thought starting out with a black color might work out okay, and it ended up working out. He's not a big fish, but I know there's fish in here, and I was happy to catch him. This is one of the few areas of the pond where it's just reeds up to the water's edge. Most of it's covered in those lily pads. And I got a couple off of these reeds. I tried to go back a little later with a jig and fish the edge of the reeds with a jig, but I didn't really do anything else. The Whopper Plopper is nice for a new pond, especially because it's a straight retrieve bait and you can cover a lot of water. And in a pond like this, where there's not a proper boat ramp, they might not have seen too many Whopper Ploppers. So it's like when the Whopper Plopper first came out, you know, the fish had never seen it, and they ate it really well. And so it's like that all over again at a pond in the woods somewhere where there isn't a ramp and there's only stream access. They tend to be a little less smart overall. That one hit it right at the boat, almost on the bow. Not bad. Kind of the same range. 1 to 2 pounds. Even if the fish are a little small, it's always fun catching them on top water. I'll get into a big one a little later on, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I replaced those hooks on the Whopper Plopper. The ones that came with it were really thick wire, which makes the fish a little harder to hook. So I went with it's actually a crankbait hook. I'll put it in the video description below. It's an owner crankbait hook with a slick gray finish, and they're super sharp, and the fish pretty much set themselves. So I'm fishing that Whopper Plopper on a crankbait rod. It's an Intenza 7-foot medium moderate glass rod. So it's not a very high-end rod, but it's soft because it's made for fishing crankbaits. And I find that with that crankbait rod and the crankbait hooks, once they eat the bait, I just have to reel and they come to the boat 9 out of 10 times. So if your rod's a little stiffer, maybe it's a true fast action rod. I can cast it a little bit further, but I end up losing more of the fish. With those two changes, the upgraded hooks and the softer rod, basically if they eat that Whopper Plopper, 9 out of 10 times they're coming in the boat. I miss very few fish, even little guys like that. And it doesn't seem to matter, big or little, they all seem to come into the boat. So that'll help your landing ratio. So what I'm doing is I'm just working the perimeter of the pond, going around and seeing if, you know, I can find an area that has more fish, or maybe there's an area where there's wind blowing in and there's a bunch of fish on that side. That was kind of the game plan, but I didn't really narrow it down too much. Now, this is a pretty small pond, so it's easy to cover. If this was a bigger pond, I'd have to make some decisions, and I'd probably just stay on the windy side of a bigger pond or a lake, because even if the wind stops blowing, all the bait and whatever the bait was eating will still be on that windy side, the wind-blown side. As it happened, I caught fish pretty much all around the lake, so there wasn't any particular area of the lake that I wanted to eliminate. So when I switched to a frog, which I did a little bit later, and a jig to slow down and try to pick apart some areas, I just went around the whole lake again, the whole pond again, because again, it's not that big and there didn't seem to be any particular area that was better than the rest. Yeah, he's not bad. They're all fun when they blow up on top water. Alright, I've switched over to the frog. And the frog allows me to fish deeper into the weeds because it's weedless. And I fish a little slower. It's more quiet. I also have a jig up on the front deck in case I need a follow-up bait or I run into a place without weeds, like that area with the reeds before. That little guy followed it out from the pads and ate it halfway to the boat. The other thing I did is, since I'm fishing a frog from the kayak, I switched frogs from my Z-Man leapfrogs to Scum Frog Trophy Frog. It comes through the pads pretty well because of the way the hooks are pointed, which are pretty much straight up and not on the sides. But the main thing is that it's a lot softer. So when I'm in the kayak, I don't have as much leverage as when I'm in the crawdad or the tin boat. So I want a softer frog in the kayak. And that just makes it easier to hook the fish. And then I have a better landing ratio too, because I can get the hooks in them better. It doesn't come through the really thick junk quite as well, so I can't really bomb it into the brush or stuff like that, heavy reeds. But I'm just fishing the pads here and it comes through the pads fine. Now that's something different. That's a bigger fish. He's pulling me along, dragging me into the pads. Probably a she, actually. Got her.
That's a good one.
Now early on when I was catching those 1 to 2 pounders, Yeah, that is a nice fish. I could have picked up and left. And there's a decision point where you have to decide, am I going to stay and try to catch that one big fish? Or am I going to go and switch ponds or come back another day or fish someplace down the road? And I had caught enough fish to know that there was plenty of fish in here. And I decided I'd just stay and see if I could catch a big one. And it ended up working out. So I'd say there's a lot of fish in this pond. Most of them are on the small side. And then there's a few big ones. That's how this pond seems to be structured. Now, I've only been here once. It might be a little different in the spring. But it's enough that I'd want to come back here. So that's another thing. I keep a list of ponds that I want to go to. And the ponds that I go to and I feel like are good or have potential or I want to go back, I put them in bold, in a bold font. And then the ones I go to and I think I'm never coming back here again, this was terrible. For whatever reason, it doesn't even matter why. Maybe the fishing was terrible or it was too busy, too crowded, or just not enough water that I think there'll be a lot of fish in it, or big fish. Those get the strike-through font, he tried to say. And that's so if I ever forget that I've been to one of these ponds, I can look and say, oh yeah, I've been there. I never want to go back. Or that place with all the tadpoles and there was no bass that I could find eating them. Yeah, that pond got the strike-through font. So I've fished in the New England area for, well, pretty much all my life, different parts, and I still find ponds that I haven't been to, and I make it a point to fish ponds that I haven't been to. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, sometimes you find a really good pond, and even if you don't, you think, well, maybe this pond will be good in the winter for ice fishing. Or maybe it's too busy now in the summer with all this boat traffic, but if I hit it in the late fall, it should be okay. So I kind of keep a list, an ever-expanding list of ponds to go to and seasons to hit them. Or maybe I find there's a pretty good crappie population. Well, that's a handy piece of information to know when you want to go crappie fishing. Maybe it's early spring and the bass aren't really moving around yet. You can get on a pretty good crappie bite early. So these little lists I keep kind of build on themselves and pay dividends further down the road. Alright, I'm making my way back to the ramp, and along the way I'm taking a few casts. I especially want to hit those little funnel areas where I squeezed the kayak through before. And I added one more little bass to my total. It was just a perfect spot to think about casting because the stream kind of narrows down at that point, and so if there was a fish there waiting for bait to wash by, that's where a fish would be ready to ambush whatever went by. In this case, a frog, or it could be bait. So I took a few more casts around as I'm making my way back down the stream. I'm kind of hung up right there on a old log or something, so I got to push my way through, but that's all right. Navigate the ferns. I got the current going with me this time, so it's a little easier going back the way I came out. Trying another one of those little funnel areas. But there doesn't seem to be anybody home on this one. My guess is that this time of year that the stream fish are mostly on the smaller side. Maybe at different points in the year some bigger fish move into the stream. Can see some bait dimpling in there. I did see some bait while I was going around the pond. Some of them look like shiners. Others look like panfish. This pond, I won't come back to ice fish though, because to get up to the pond over moving water could be dangerous. Even if the ice was pretty thick, there could be some spots on the stream that were too thin, because moving water just doesn't freeze well. And even if 90% of it is solid, if 10% of it isn't, that could be unpleasant. So that's it for this video. Thank you everyone for watching. I'll list all the gear I used today in the video description, so you can check that out, and you can duplicate the same exact stuff that I was doing at some local pond near you. Hopefully have some good success there too. Alright, thanks again. I'll catch you on the next one. See ya!